I know what the Reds should do at this trade deadline.
You are Locked On Reds, your daily Cincinnati Reds podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Reds. My name is Jeff Carr. I am a lifelong Cincinnati Reds fan. Seriously, I have the baby pictures to prove it. And I've been hosting this show for over 6 years now. This is my 6th season, so just a little bit over 6 years now. And I love the Cincinnati Reds, and I love to bring a daily show to you that is accessible, talking about this Cincinnati Reds team. We're going to look at some geeky numbers. We'll look at the big thing on every Reds fan's mind, and we'll overreact, of course, to the marathon that is the MLB season, because I'm so glad that you're along with me here today. Locked On Reds is, of course, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. We are your team every single day, and on today's show, I know exactly what the Reds should do during this trade deadline. I'm going to tell you what it is. It's a little bit of a tweak as to, buy or sell. I think there's an answer, but you have to tweak it just a little bit. Plus, given the plan, what will it cost? What will the Reds have to give up? Who do they not want to give up? That's probably the easier question to answer among all of that. And then later on in today's show, Sully, who is actually Locked On MLB host, but he's filling in for Locked On A's as well. He will join me in an A's capacity as we look at how the Reds can get Brent Rooker. That's all coming up on today's Locked On Reds episode that is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. As playoffs wind down, the sports stop sporting like we want them to, but this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right, there's something for everyone, every day, all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and get started today. And where we will get started here today is that the Reds need to be buyers at this trade deadline. Now, there is a caveat to that, because I think that come what may, the Reds should be buyers with next year in mind. Can they get better this year with this trade? Absolutely. I'm not saying go out and trade for minor league prospects. Go get you a guy that's major league ready, but a guy with multiple years of control. I think that how the Reds play during the month of July will determine whether they can add rental players to the shopping list. Because I think when you talk about buy or sell, especially around the trade deadline for Major League Baseball, when you're saying buyers or sellers, when you talk about buyers, you're talking about a team that's going to go get an expiring contract, go get a guy that's going to be here for just the rest of this year, hopefully get your team to the playoffs, make a playoff run, and then he says his goodbyes and he hits free agency. I think that the Reds still have a lot of work to do if they're going to be in that group, but I do believe they are at a point where they cannot sell. Sure, you could trade away some of the guys that you signed in free agency last year, but for the most part, the guys that you brought in here aren't going to be bringing you big hauls of prospects that are ready to go next year or the year after. You're going to be restocking and retooling for multiple years down the road. Think what the Reds got for Tyler Naquin, and they got Hector Rodriguez, which was a good deal. Hector Rodriguez is doing pretty awesome down in Dayton, but he's in Dayton. That's at high A. He still has a few years before he is going to be considered part of the major league plan. That's the kind of guys that you would get if you would trade Jeimer Candelario, if you would trade expiring contracts in the Reds bullpen, things like that. So I don't go too crazy about, should the Reds sell? Because they're not going to be traditional sellers. You think of like, as Sully will kind of mention here later on in the show, he kind of talks about, the early 2010s of the Houston Astros and the Chicago Cubs, how they just tore it all down to the studs and started over. The Reds aren't doing that. The majority of the Reds core is going to be here under team control for the next 5 years. So there's no reason to do that. So they can't be sellers, so be buyers. Look for multiple years of control. And look, the Reds have an opportunity still. Okay, we've been doing this all year where we're just like, all right, they got a really tough stretch here in May. They got to endure, and then what can they do in June? The month of June, they were one game over 500, 14-13. And while you don't want to be under 500, that's not exactly, making up the ground that you lost in May. The Reds have a great opportunity this month. Now, these first 3 games here in New York, obviously going to be super tough against the Yankees. Although the Yankees have hit the skids a little bit here recently, they're still a very, very good team. World Series aspirations, definitely. The Reds go to Atlanta in about 3 weeks. And I think there's one more series this month that you would say is tough. The rest of the month, they've got some series that they should win and possibly sweep. So you could see them really get some ground back. And if they do that, then you can add rental players to the list. You can look at guys like Tommy Pham. You can look at the veteran guys whose contracts are expiring by the end of this season. But as of right now, they need to be looking for multiple years of control. And I think that they can do that. We'll talk here in a few minutes about who should be available in a trade like this, but I kind of want to look at some guys that they should go get. We have talked, every dayers will know. We talked ad nauseum about Brent Rooker. Go get Brent Rooker, right-handed power bat in the outfield, having the best year of his career, but he's coming off of a year where he was an all-star in 2023 and he hit 30 homers. So it's not as if that this is a complete surprise in the course of his career, but he's also 29 years old, and he's not going to be a part of the Oakland A's core whenever they want to be good again, which, as we'll talk to Sully here in a bit, but I don't think it's going to be, next year or the year after that. And while he has multiple years of control, he should be a guy that the Reds are looking for, because I don't think the A's are looking to keep him. Should they go after Luis Robert? We've talked to Nazem. I've said I don't want the Reds to go get him, but if they can make a deal for him, I think he makes sense because of his star potential and the multiple years of control. He's under control for like the next 3 or 4 years or something like that. Could they get, going back to the A's, could they get Mason Miller? He's going to be expensive for what a relief pitcher is because he's 26 years old. But could he be a guy? There's 2 other guys as well, and this is something I want to talk to John and Mike Frisch, our hosts of Locked On Angels. I believe that's going to be coming up next week. I want to see what the Reds can do to be trade partners with the Angels, because boy, oh boy, the Reds would look good if they went out and they added Luis Rengifo or Taylor Ward or both. Taylor Ward's solid outfield bat. Luis Rengifo can play the outfield, plays the infield mostly, but has the ability to play the outfield. And I'm not talking about in the same vein of like Santiago Espinal, where David Bell's just like, yeah, no, we'll put him in left field. He's played there before. It's like, yeah, David, you put him there 3 days ago. It's your fault that he's been in left field before. It's not as if he has experience. But no, I look at this and I say, there are some guys, Taylor Ward, Rengifo, Mason Miller, Luis Robert, multiple years of control. Will you have to give up a lot? Sure. But think of what you're getting. All of these guys have proven it at the major league level. Most likely what you'll have to trade, they have not made it to the major leagues yet. Now, there could be a situation where the Reds have to give up a guy who is currently in the majors. The situation would have to make sense. It would be hard. But I've got some feelings as to why it's not impossible that would be the case. And we're going to talk about that coming up next. We've reached the point in the summer where baseball is at the center stage, and FanDuel is the best place to go to take advantage of all their different prop bets and things like that they have during baseball season. I'm looking at today's Reds-Yankees game, the series opener. Graham Ashcraft's on the mound, Luis Gil for the Yankees. Luis Gil has had a very surprising season kind of coming out of nowhere, and Graham Ashcraft struggled as of late. But my goodness, the Yankees are huge favorites in this game. I think the Reds are getting a little bit disrespected on this. I don't necessarily know if I'm going to go for the money line, but the Reds to cover 1.5. So if they lose by 1, then you win your bet. The odds on that are just minus 130. So that's not a bad thing. And then you can put together the Ellie parlay plus that. Even if they lose by 1, you're still hitting on your bet over at FanDuel. A reminder, the Ellie parlay is Ellie to get a steal, Ellie to get a run, and Ellie to get at least 2 total bases, and you hit that parlay. Check it all out over at FanDuel.com/lockedon. Plus, they've got all kinds of great promotions and boosts. They've even got a great same-game parlay boost rolling right now. Again, that's FanDuel.com/lockedon. You got to check out FanDuel. They are an official sports book of Major League Baseball. You've got to check out Locked On Sports Today. It's a free 24/7 streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories in sports. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And speaking of every day, shout out to our everydayers out there. Thank you for being a part of the show, and make sure you hit me up on Twitter at Jeff Carr with 3 F's, or if you're watching here on YouTube, hi, thanks. Drop a thought down in the comments section below. What are your thoughts on the Reds at the trade deadline? I got a feeling that a lot of folks are a little bit hesitant about what the Reds could do, because quite frankly, the Reds have been half measures for a very long time now. Yeah, they need to do this, they need to do that, they need to do this, and they only do like a third of that. And maybe in really good cases, they do half of that. We talked about this offseason. Honestly, they did 2/3 of it. The only thing that they didn't do was they didn't bring in a power right-handed bat in the outfield. And oh my goodness, has that hurt them. They didn't bring any outfielders in, frankly, and the outfield depth is just laughable. So I'd be interested to see what you had to say about that here on, YouTube if you're watching, or hit me up on Twitter, like I said. And speaking of, by the way, everydayers coming up on the next Locked On Reds podcast, we'll talk with Locked On Yankees about Game 1 of the series, and we'll give you our prediction as to who will win the other 2 games. So, okay, Jeff, the Reds are going to be buyers. What are they giving away? What could the Reds trade to make this happen? Because, sure, the Reds have some prospects. Their farm system is lower ranked than it was a couple of years ago because everybody graduated to the major league level. I saw, I believe it was, I was tagged in a tweet by everydayer Scott Strassmeyer, and I appreciate being included in this, but I thought that the graphic was a little bit lacking. The graphic, it was like a Venn diagram of teams who have the capability to spend a lot, teams who are in contention, and teams who have high-ranked farm systems and things like that. And then the Reds were in a group that was outside of that Venn diagram in that they have none of those things. And while I am concerned about whether or not ownership will actually spend on this team, the whole thing about not having a high-ranking farm system is because they graduated all their top prospects to the major leagues. In fact, I would find that far more beneficial than a team that just has a top farm system. The Reds have been there the last couple of years where they've had a top farm system. I want those guys at the major league level. So anyway, that's where the Reds are with this, and that's probably why it's not as easy to link them in trades. If you're looking at articles from The Athletic or from MLB.com or from ESPN, where they're just like, here are the top trade candidates for this deadline season, and they're connecting teams, the teams that make the most sense for them based on the trades that they could offer. The Reds are not being listed. Partially because they're not in a, typical contention spot right now, but also because what they have to offer in a trade isn't quite as lucrative as some other teams. So, do you offer somebody at the major league level? Are you adverse to that? Because the Reds can't be. What was the mindset of the Reds back in the early 70s when they traded for Joe Morgan? That's what they need. Think about this for a minute. And there's some everydayers and there's some folks who have talked to me before that remember the Big Red Machine era vividly and can speak to this better. Obviously, I just read about it. But, the trade was Joe Morgan, Ed Armbrister, Jack Billingham, Cesar Geronimo. All of them played huge roles in the Big Red Machine, but what they gave up was Tommy Helms and Lee May. And there's another guy who's, and I should have wrote down his name, blanked on his name, but definitely not as consequential as those first two guys. But both Tommy Helms and Lee May were Reds for much longer than anybody who is currently a Red. There is no Cincinnati Reds player that is currently on the roster that has been here for 7 or 8 years. That's where Tommy Helms and Lee May were. And the Reds were okay with making that trade. And in fact, I remember seeing the internet has archives of newspaper clippings and things like that. And the fact that they were getting roasted in the Enquirer for making this trade. Of course, hindsight's 2020, the Reds made one of the best trades they've ever made because they got one of the best players in the history of baseball in Joe Morgan, but they also got some other very key members of the Big Red Machine in this one trade. But it was because they didn't have any sort of trepidation. Well, I don't know. Lee May, yeah, he's a fan favorite. Everybody really likes him. Tommy Helms, he's a fan favorite. I don't know. People like him. I don't think jerseys were a big thing back in the 70s, but today, if we, copy paste that into today's world, there's a lot of people that are wearing their jerseys. If the Chicago White Sox say you could have Luis Robert, if you send us Jonathan India, Cam Collier, Chase Petty, and I don't know, Victor Acosta or Hector Rodriguez, somebody like that. That's interesting. I don't know if I would say right away that I would take that because that is a lot. And you'd probably have to be like, all right, well, what about can the White Sox add in Garrett Crochet? Can the White Sox add in a good relief pitcher? Something else in there? But talk about it. That's the kind of deal. Nick Krall, this is the point where whether or not the Reds go crazy in this month of July, Nick Krall has a very big opportunity here. The Reds have a core in place. And should you trade a member of that core to get somebody who's even better, then you could transform this team into the contender that we all maybe, I don't want to say hallucinated, but at least dreamed of this past offseason as to what they could become. And when you're thinking about who the Reds could trade to do that, I think the only guy who might be untouchable, quote unquote, is Ellie. I don't know who you could possibly make a trade for Ellie right now. That's the only guy on this roster. Unless the Dodgers came to you and said, here's Shohei Ohtani and we'll pay for his salary. And they're not doing that. I cannot think of a trade that I would make for Ellie De La Cruz right now. Other than that, there's a deal to be had. Noelvi Marte, there's a deal to be had. Hunter Green, there's a deal to be had. Nick Krall has to look at this roster and say, okay, they've got the makings of something good. And I'm not saying you put these guys out on the market, but if there is a deal to be made, how creative can you get? Because there shouldn't be a line that you say, no, I'm not crossing that line. Because sure, it's good right now, but it can definitely be better. And the Reds have the payroll flexibility to do that. I was looking at this, yesterday was the final deferred contract, final deferred check, if you would, that they've sent to Ken Griffey Jr. He is no longer on the books for the Reds. So with that, I was like, okay, where's the payroll at? The Reds are still like bottom like 5 teams in the league. I'm sorry, bottom 6 teams in the league in payroll. They got room. If you're a sports owner, you got room. And they should be able to make the necessary upgrades. Speaking of necessary upgrades, been talking about Brent Rooker a lot. So I thought, let's get the opinion of somebody with an A's mindset, because they seem to have a few players, including Brent Rooker, that would satisfy the criteria that I've been setting forth here in today's show, including my favorite trade target. We'll look at what it might take to get that coming up next. PrizePicks is the #1 daily fantasy sports app in all of America because they've got every single thing you can think of when it comes to your favorite players, your favorite statistics. They even have, as we're approaching July 4th, they have the Nathan's Hot Dog Eating Contest competition, and they've got a special square for contestant Jeffrey Esper to at least eat half a hot dog. Pretty sure he's going to eat at least one hot dog. So you've got a free space for July 4th. And as we move through baseball season and stuff like that, you've got all kinds of great things when you can look at your favorite players. You can look at Ellie. I think coming into Yankee Stadium, his first trip there, Ellie is going to show out. Remember what he did his first trip to LA. Remember what he did his first trip to Atlanta. He loves the big stage, and he is going to help you hit some picks over at PrizePicks. Remember, 2 or more picks, even sometimes as little as 4 picks, can get you 100 times your money. So check out PrizePicks today. Download the app and use promo code, all lowercase, LOCKEDONMLB for a first deposit match of up to $100. Again, that's promo code, all lowercase, LOCKEDONMLB over at PrizePicks to get your first deposit matched up to $100. All you got to do is pick more or pick less. It's that easy. And here on Locked On Reds, we pride ourselves on bringing you the latest information on everything Reds, whether it be preseason, whether it be the offseason, whether it be the All-Star break, playoffs. It's year-round. You know what else is year-round? Collection season. Just because tax season is over doesn't mean the IRS will stop coming after you for unfiled taxes. The IRS can garnish your wages, levy your bank accounts, and even seize your property. Don't let the IRS target you. Let licensed professionals and tax experts at Tax Network USA go to bat for you. I know, I've filed my taxes multiple different ways because I have multiple jobs, different things, different documents and all this other stuff. Tax Network USA makes it easy. With over 14 years of experience and an A+ rating by the Better Business Bureau, Tax Network USA has saved their clients over $1 billion in tax debt. Whether you owe taxes, have complicated matters that require tax planning, or finally hit that parlay this season and need help correctly filing, call 1-800-549-1000 or visit tnusa.com/lockedon. For more information, see the link in this episode's description below. You can catch every pitch of the Reds' hometown broadcast with SiriusXM wherever you go. Just download the SXM app and search the word Reds. Also, bookmark CincinnatiRedsTalk.com for written content about your Cincinnati Reds. Well, it's trade season, or at least it should be. I think teams wait far too long to get their trades in, unless, of course, you're the Padres and the Marlins, who already made their trade earlier this season. But the Cincinnati Reds should be buyers. I've been saying that all episode, and there's a caveat to that, of course, but I think that the A's have a guy that fits that caveat. If you've listened, if you're an everydayer of the Locked On Reds podcast, and if you're a Locked On A's fan just checking in on this crossover segment here that I have with Sully over, who is filling in for Locked On A's, doing a fine job doing that as well. Brent Rooker has been my guy, and if you ask me to pick a guy that the Reds could possibly go get, that's the guy that I want them to go for it. But the big question is, Sully, with the situation with the A's, they're going to play in Sacramento for a few years, and then they're going to move to Vegas, and there's all of this turmoil, right? Maybe to everything. Are they in the position right now that it's everything must go, or are there some players that are nailed down?
No, there's nothing nailed down. I think that Rooker is guaranteed to be traded. He's going to be 30 just after the World Series is over, as they're having their parade in Oakland celebrating the championship. He has several years of control. Mm-hmm. He is not going to be a free agent until 2028. But he is, they select him off of waivers. They got him for nothing. And he is at peak value right now. He has a decent, if it wasn't for Miller, he would probably be going to his second straight All-Star game because the A's need a representative. And while he's not putting up numbers that are going to make anyone forget Jose Canseco, he's having a fine year. He's going to be 30 soon, so he's not part of anyone's long-term plans. And if you need a quality right-handed power hitter, he could fit the bill perfectly. Now, the A's are in a, obviously, no team has ever been in this situation. The closest we've ever seen is when the Expos were owned by Major League Baseball at the beginning of the 2000s. And even though they contended for the wild card, they couldn't bring players up and they couldn't make a trade because it was this bizarre conflict of interest. So they could work out a deal with the Orioles to move the team from Montreal to Washington. So what the A's need more than anything is quantity. Mm-hmm. They need, if they're going to trade Rooker, they need 3 bodies. Okay. They need to get 3. Now, ideally, they would get 1 top prospect. But you're not going to fork over your top prospect for Brent Rooker. So give me 3 good ones. Okay. Any person they trade, they need quantity almost as much as quality at this point. They need to just flood their system, which, by the way, is what the Cubs did and is what the Astros did when they traded everything that wasn't nailed down at the beginning of the 2010s to eventually build up a trash can-filled World Series champion in Houston, sorry, H-Town, and the championship that Chicago won over Cleveland, which they kept together for a minute and a half. But they traded away everything. We don't care if Jeff Smarsta went to Notre Dame, will be a fan favorite. We need everyone. Everyone's got to go. And the A's know, first of all, their drafts they've been having have been grotesque. I mean, they have swung and missed on so many draft picks over the last 10 years. There's one reason why how you got here. You got to, if they trade Rooker to Cincinnati, or if they trade J.P. Sears, who again isn't the second coming of Grover Cleveland Alexander, but he's a major league pitcher. Miguel Andujar, I have a better chance of finishing the season with the A's than Miguel Andujar, which they got for a Milky Way bar is what they got for him, to acquire him. And he's playing okay. So a team says we could use an additional bat for depth. Whatever they do, there has to be 2 or 3 names coming back because their farm system is garbage.
So let's look at this. You're the way that you're talking here. I got a few ideas.
I have a ray from heaven. A ray from heaven is coming up from there.
Going quantity. It's going to be a little bit interesting because there are a number of guys that I would pick that are in high A, not necessarily double A. Mm-hmm. But we're not talking, ready in a year or 2. It'd probably take 2 or 3 years, so they'd be perfect for Vegas. Right. The first guy is Cam Collier, which, according to MLB Pipeline, is the number 3 prospect in the Reds organization. Top 100 guy, third baseman, first-round pick by the Reds out of JUCO. He actually went to JUCO. He graduated high school, I think, when he was 17. He was playing JUCO ball when he was 18.
Left-handed hitting, third baseman. He's a middle of the. He looks like he could be a potential middle of the order hitter for the team. Has good power numbers. He strikes out a lot, but who doesn't these days? Not having a great overall in terms of average season, but that's, sometimes you have to take that with a grain of salt because they may be just trying to, teaching their prospects to hit line drives instead of building up their batting averages.
Right. He's got the power. It's going to be the consistency as far as at bat to at bat. What's that look like? The next guy that I would add to this deal would be Julian Aguilar. He did make it to AAA this season. He is 23 years old. He is a
right-handed pitcher.
Right-handed pitcher. He was the Reds pitcher of the year in their minor league organization last season. Really good 2023 overall. He's been moving through the system. Could be ready probably in a year or two, maybe even just 1 year. To be ready for. So then, you pitch a couple of years in Sacramento and then you're ready to go in your prime whenever the team hits Vegas. Pretty solid pitcher there as well. And then the third guy for the quantity I would add in, kind of go down. He's a relief pitcher. And he's a guy that could be up with the Reds here soon, but I think that's kind of what makes him a little bit tantalizing in a deal. I would give up Zach Maxwell. He's a right-handed pitcher, 23 years old.
Pitches for Louisville right now. Has a very good strikeout to walk ratio, 47 strikeouts to strikeouts per innings pitch ratio, 47 strikeouts to 26 and a third innings pitched, and they're batting only 191 off of them. I'd be all for that deal. I mean, one of the biggest problems the A's have had, other than that, their terrible farm system, and they're whiffing on their draft picks. One of the problems it's made is that, yes, they're not a very good team, and it's also who's the foundation of this team? Who's the player that Rooker is the centerpiece of the lineup. That's a problem. He's a complementary piece. And sometimes you say, like, okay, this team stinks, but they have this great prospect coming up. They have this great person who's coming up who's going to be the foundation of the lineup. They don't have that. If the A's can trade away 4 or 5 veterans and get 2 or 3 times that many players into their farm system, that would be a successful trade deadline.
That's going to do it for today's episode of Locked On Reds. Thank you so much for checking us out. If you are new to the show, make sure that you subscribe and follow the podcast on all your favorite apps, including right here on YouTube. And make sure you hit us up on Twitter. You can hit me up at Jeff Carr with 3 Fs. You can hit Steve up at S. Offenbaker with 2 Fs. And hit up the show at Locked On Reds as well. Like I said, coming up tomorrow, going to be breaking down Game 1 of the Reds and Yankees series and predicting the rest of the series with Locked On Yankees for a special crossover. But until then, remember that we will be Locked On Reds every single day.